First of all, thanks a lot, John. Very welcome to have you here. Very happy to have that moment with you. We have a great conversation last week about the book that I am writing with Felipe. And I'm very happy for you to be part of my videocast, Strategist Revival, so I can be back as a strategist on the industry that I haven't been working directly on the last 5 years, so I can remember all the things in it. And reading your book again would be great. But then, first of all, please tell us about, and I'm sharing this with other planners here, especially from Brazil, but from other places as well in Latin America. But please tell us about your career that you have told me on the last conversation that we had. But please tell us and then about your career.
First of all, Rafa, thanks very much for inviting me, and nice to talk to you again. My career, it started in, 1984, in a rather accidental sort of way. I did a geography degree at university and had no ambition other than to teach geography and coach cricket and football in a secondary school somewhere. And a friend of mine told me that he was interviewing with advertising agencies in London, and they paid expenses from Nottingham, where I was at university, to London. And if we both applied and could both get interviews, then we could go down to London and have a nice time with some friends of his who lived there. And I agreed to do it. I applied to agencies, and the job seemed interesting to me. But I had no great anticipation of being hired by anybody. I just thought I'd go for the interview experience and to party with my friend. And I got a job and he didn't. And I got a job in client service at an agency called Bose Massimi Pollitt. And when I interviewed with them, they said, "Oh, it looks to us like you should be a planner." And I asked them to describe what a planner was. And they told me, and it seemed very sort of data heavy and analytical. And I thought, no, I don't fancy that. I'd rather run a piece of business. But I think I'd been in the agency for about 3 weeks before I realized what planners did versus what client service people did. And I thought, no, that's the job I want to do. And I trained with a man named Peter Field, who you and your listeners will probably be familiar with, who does a lot of work on effectiveness. And I worked for Peter for 6 months as part of my training. And towards the end of that 6 months, and I hope nothing to do with me, he resigned to go and work for another agency. And the agency offered me, if I wanted to transfer into planning, to pick up his clients and do his job, albeit at a more junior level and with some more senior supervision. And I embraced it wholeheartedly. So I learned the planning trade at one of the two agencies that started planning in the late 1960s. And after 5 years at that agency, I moved to San Francisco. Bose Massimi Pollitt had bought a small stake in Goodby Silverstein and Partners, or Goodby Berlin and Silverstein as it was then, and asked me if I'd be interested in going over to help the hippies in San Francisco, as they put it, establish a planning department. And again, it felt like it would be an adventure, and I agreed to do it. And I think I'd been in San Francisco for about 5 minutes before I thought, I want to stay here. And I'm not just going to set up a department for someone else to run. I want to run it. And I then spent 10 years, initially as planning director and later as a partner at Goodby. And for me at the time, it really felt like it was the best job in the world. It was an agency that was still young, eager to make its mark on the world, embraced planning wholeheartedly and in the right way, and not in a put your arms around the planner and tell them what a great brief they've written, and then the planner puts the arm around the creative and tells them what a great ad. I mean, that we fought with each other, and there was a lot of tension around the ideas and the work. But that's essential if you're going to get the best results. And I loved it. And I would still be there had we not had a family emergency that led us back to England. And when I was back in England, I met Sir Martin Sorrell. Again, not deliberately, I just got a message through a mutual friend that he would like to meet and have a chat. I met him in London. We talked about cricket for 45 minutes. And at the end of it, he said, "So are you going to come and work for us then?" And I said, yes. I had no idea what I was coming to do, what my title would be, what he'd pay me. But we just said, yeah, we'll work together. I really liked him. And I spent 17 years there working as a planner. I was sort of on the bench for whenever he needed senior strategic involvement on an important piece of business or a new business pitch. But I also ran the WPP Fellowship, which was a global recruitment and training program where we hired very, very high level graduates out of universities from around the world and prepared them for leadership positions in WPP companies. And I loved doing that. And that took me through to 2018. And in the middle of 2018, I just decided, actually, it's time to retire. And I never knew when I would decide or how I would decide, but there was a moment in 2018 when I just knew that I no longer wanted to work for a big company, fly back and forth between Australia and London. And since then, I've been traveling, writing, painting, and doing occasional consulting jobs. I work only for people, if it has to be somebody I like, it has to be a project that I'm interested in. And that narrows things down enormously, because a lot of the people who ask me to do things I don't like, and the stuff they're asking me to do doesn't interest me. So I say no as politely as I can. And they also have to be willing to pay me well. So if I'm going to break myself away from my writing and my traveling and my family and my dog, and
I know that.
So that's my career.
I'm happier now because you said yes to this opportunity to have the participation.
Oh, well, yeah.
I'm happier.
Yes.
Thanks a lot for that.
No worries.
Thanks a lot for that. And I keep thinking about Got Milk, but what's the case study, the job that you've made that you are most proud of it?
I suppose the things I'm most proud of are always the things that were hardest to do, and the things about which other people had the lowest expectations. And Got Milk is certainly one of those. And I remember when, excuse me, when the agency was first asked to pitch the business, a lot of people in the agency said, why on earth are we doing this? Nobody's ever done any good work on milk. This is just a waste of time, and we'll be producing terrible advertising and our reputation will suffer, and I don't want any part of it. And I'd already worked on milk a little bit in the UK, and I knew that around milk, from some of the planning work I'd done back there were a lot of emotions, and it felt to me like it was potentially very rich territory. And when people said to Jeff Goodby, nobody's done good work on milk, he said, well, isn't that the point? It's our opportunity to do good work on milk. And if we don't, everybody's going to say, well, it's impossible because nobody ever has. And if we do it, they'll be pleasantly surprised, and our reputation will be enhanced. So, we got on with the campaign, and within 6 months of having started work on that pitch, and the first campaign is launched, everybody in the agency who doubted it wanted to work on it. So I guess I'm very proud of that. And it's, of all the campaigns I've done, it's probably the one that is best known around the world. But I did things for Chevy's Mexican restaurants, who were a San Francisco-based company, which was a very small local campaign, but that won a Grand Lion at Cannes. Was an extraordinarily effective campaign. Did some work for a disability insurance client, and that disability insurance is the sort of thing that nobody wants to talk about or address. But again, a very, very effective campaign. And for me, I always wanted to work with agencies and on campaigns where we could produce stuff that was creatively distinctive, but also commercially relevant and effective. And for me, if you didn't do both of those things, you were kind of wasting your time. And a lot of agencies do one, but not both. And they either do really dull, relevant advertising or really distinctive stuff that has nothing whatsoever to do with what they're advertising or the way people relate to it. So I mean that's the planner in me, and I want it to be both of those things simultaneously.
And what's the best way to do that, considering the creatives, for example, the creative brief, or here in Brazil, we have the media guys working on the same agency. So media and creative agency are the same one over here. So we get a better connection with the media guys, but of course, all over the planet with the creatives. But what's the best way to achieve such results that you've got from Got Built that is still on today?
I think one thing that you mentioned there is very important, and you're very lucky in Brazil to still have media people working in the creative agencies. For me, that was the worst thing that ever happened to the advertising industry. And I mean, financially and in terms of economies and efficiency and all of that, I know why people did it, and why the media agencies were separated. But I never worked on an effective campaign that didn't have a media person very closely involved in the development of the idea. Now, for me as a planner, I can never dictate strategy, and I always regarded it as my job in the agency to provide the key decision makers, by whom I mean usually the client and the creative directors. I had to provide those decision makers with all the information they needed to make the most intelligent decision about what their advertising was trying to achieve and how it should achieve it. And I worked very closely with both of those constituencies throughout the process, while also working very closely with people in the real world. And ultimately, the opinion of the truth of the relationship that people in the real world have with a brand or category is the most important piece of information or pieces of information that those guys need. They need to know how people out there really think about their brand. Do they care about it? If they don't care about it, why don't they care about it? And through the sort of experimentation I might do in research, what could we do to make them care about it? And I used a lot of fact, I used a lot of data, I used a lot of anecdote, I used instinct in that, but I always worked with them throughout the process so that they reached their decisions at the same time I reached mine. So for example, with creative briefing, I never ever gave creative people a finished brief when I worked in an agency. I gave them half a brief and said, all right, I just want to check in. Here's some half-assed thinking. Here's what I think the solution might be. But I need to talk to you guys about it just to get a sense of whether I'm in the right direction or not. So, for example, when we pitched the Sega business in California, I was working with a creative director called Dave O'Hare. And I said to him, I've got an idea that with the new, I think it was new 16-bit technology at the time, which sounds so archaic now, but it was the time of Sonic the Hedgehog and 16-bit technology, and Sega had taken a leap above Nintendo with this new technology and with the popularity of Sonic. And I said to him, when I'm looking at the main idea of this, it feels to me almost like a baseball player getting called up from the minors to the majors, that there's just something about being invited to play at a higher level. And Dave just said, welcome to the next level. Is that what you're saying? And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, only I'm not good enough creatively to have articulated like that. And he started sketching this thing out, and he was working with an art director, and they wrote welcome to the next level in a code, and sort of adapted it into gamer language and habits. But the moment he interpreted my slightly poor idea into something better, he owned it. And he then went to Silverstein and Goodby and was like, okay, here's the line for Sega. And they loved it. And off they went. They briefed like 20 teams around the agency, and they were off and running. Where was the brief? Well, I actually had to write one later for client purposes. But I mean, the best briefs are always written after the fact. It's the conversation and the stimulus you can provide to creative people that's most important.
That's very interesting, because sometimes I used to say, I'm not writing a retro brief. Like the creators had the idea and they just come with the idea so you could write the retrograde brief.
But in the end, I never cared who had the idea. And I went to a conference in London many years ago where John Hegarty was speaking, and John was asked, how do you define a really good brief? And he said, well, whatever terminology your agency uses, there's always a section there about the main idea that you want to communicate or plant or whatever. Some people say, what do we want to say? But I always prefer to say, what do we want to communicate? Because it's what goes on in the heads of people out there that matters, not what you broadcast. But Hegarty said, if I can write the line that's included in that main idea on a sheet of paper and draw a picture of the product above it and think to myself, it's not a great ad, but it's an interesting idea. The juxtaposition of that product and that idea is interesting. Then it's my job as creative person. I pin it up above my desk and think to myself, as creative director, it's now my job to come up with a better ad than that. So I've always thought, in a way, it's my job to have the first ad, however poorly articulated it might be, but to have at least to get to the point where I've got an idea that works on a poster. And then it's the job of my creative partners to come up with better posters.
No, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
To think about that, how they can make it to evolve and be very, of course, very creative. And I was thinking about during my time in college, how I was reading The Art of Planning here in Brazil, Arte do Planejamento, Truth, Lies, and Advertising. So what do you believe that has changed from the planners on that time from today? What would be the Truth, Lies, and Advertising if you were writing it today? What's the difference?
Well, it's very interesting because on a couple of occasions since Truth, Lies, and Advertising was published, which is, gosh, it's a long time ago now. Was it 1997, maybe?
Yeah. I believe, 1997, I entered college. I believe it's 8.
Yeah, so it was 1998 then. A couple of times since John Wiley, who published it, have asked me if I would write a second edition and update it. And on every occasion where I've been asked about it, I've said no, because fundamentally, I don't think the proper job of a planner has changed. And I say that very deliberately because I think a lot of planners' jobs have changed and have moved away from it, and they and their agencies have allowed themselves to be distracted by the shiny new toys of technology and data and so on, at a time where they're also underfunded. But if planning is being done right, I think fundamentally it hasn't changed since I wrote that book. The other reason I wouldn't do it is I've not worked consistently as a planner in an agency since then, and I wanted the book to include case histories that I'd worked on and that I knew the truth about. We were talking about writing retroactive briefs. Well, a lot of case histories are post-rationalized and written to make people look smarter than they really were, or for people to claim credit for ideas that in reality came from a number of different directions from people both inside and outside the agency. And I wanted the campaigns that I wrote about in that book to be things that I was intimately familiar with and could tell the story exactly as it happened, because the best advertising is often the result of a number of accidents that somebody manages to sort of string together and turn into an idea. And I wanted to tell the truth about that. I wanted to tell the truth about how unreliable the process can be and how dependent it is on little sort of twists of fortune, and have people understand what the role of the planner was in that. So, and I always saw my role in those various campaigns as that of an enabler. It was my job to try to create an environment in which good ideas could be generated and developed, whether that meant in the research I was doing with people outside in the real world, creating an environment in which they were comfortable talking about things that they might not otherwise be comfortable talking about, or certainly wouldn't get to the same sort of quality of truth using a lot of more traditional research means. It was creating an environment in the agency where the right number of people could sort of bounce ideas off each other without sort of fear of reprisal. Not too many people. You have to have enough, but not too many. Figuring out how and when to engage the client in the process, and I always used to try to find an ally in the client organization who could accompany me throughout the consumer research that I was doing, so that he was there to be and watching all of the interviews or groups that I did to be able to discuss what was coming out of them and tie that back to his better knowledge than mine of what went on in his client organization or his manufacturing process or the ingredients that went into things. And then if I could create all the right conversations in all of the important areas, it was my job to kind of draw to spot where connections between the different parts existed, and if they didn't exist, to try to make them. And every good idea is a combination of ideas from different directions. They represent some kind of combination of understanding of the brand and its place in the world and the promise that it makes to the world, and a broader cultural truth which has to do with circumstances that the brand is in right now, and a deeper, more timeless human truth. Most of the great ideas have that basic element of humanity in them, and my job was always to draw those things together, and it's only in drawing those things together you can really get to what you could credibly call an insight.
That's a fantastic thing to think about credibly say that's an insight, because if people say that to check the insight for the consumer, of course, but also from the category on comes analysis of the competitors, from the culture of the country or that audience that you are going to talk to,
Yes.
the companion as well. And from that point, I would like to know your perspective, your point of view on diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainable marketing, ESG, on advertising. How can planners work on those points, if they need or should do it from your point of view?
So the first part you said on diversity and inclusion. Right?
Yes.
I mean, my view has always been that diversity is essential in the advertising business, and I mean diversity in its broadest sense. And I don't want to go down a lot of sort of minority rabbit holes, but to me, it's imperative that everybody in an agency, everybody in a department, everybody working on a particular account has a slightly different point of view. They have different life experience. They have different professional experience. They bring different problem-solving approaches, and that's only possible if you draw from the widest possible range of people. So, for example, I remember when I went for my first interview with an agency in London, I looked across the desk at the guy who was interviewing me, and on the top of my application, he had handwritten non-Oxbridge, by which he meant I hadn't gone to Oxford or Cambridge. So I was like a social experiment, because I'd been to Nottingham University, which he regarded as an inferior place of learning, and his agency pretty much hired exclusively Oxford and Cambridge graduates.
Wow.
And his first question to me was, why didn't you go to Cambridge? Or why didn't you go to Oxford? And I said to him, well, funny you should ask, because I was offered a place at Cambridge and I declined because I preferred to go to Nottingham. And his response was, you fucking idiot. Now, there have been times since where I've wondered whether I was an idiot, as he said. But
Sure.
you know, I wanted to study geography, and the study of geography at Nottingham was much more sort of practically based, and there were field trips to the mountains of Norway and to southern France, and there were a lot of other reasons why I wanted to go to Nottingham, not least because it had two sort of first division football teams and an international cricket ground as well. So I thought, you know, that's my recreation taken care of. But you know, it was not a diverse industry, and a lot of the people in it had gone to the same kind of schools. They'd gone to the same Oxford and Cambridge colleges, and as a result, they thought about things pretty much the same way. And it was essential to get people from different backgrounds, social, cultural, etc. So I've always believed in diversity. And when I took on the WPP fellowship, it was important to me to cast the net a lot wider, you know, to look to hire more people internationally, to hire. And I never set out to say, like, okay, well, this year I'm going to hire 33% are going to be people of color, you know, XY% are going to be, you know, sort of female or male. But I just set out to hire the most interesting people. And funnily enough, if you set out with your aim being to hire the most interesting people, you naturally create diversity. So something, and if you think about this global leadership program, 2/3 of the people on it were female, not male. So 2/3 female, 1/3 male. And relative to the industry average, the number of people from ethnic minorities, sort of different cultural backgrounds, was probably 2 or 3 times the industry standard. But it was never deliberate. What was deliberate was hiring interesting people who thought about the world differently. That's the way the advertising industry should operate, in my opinion. And as for your question about sustainability, I think it's highly important for people to take seriously the business of sustainability. But I also believe that too many agencies have lost track of what they really exist for. Agencies don't exist to make the world a more sustainable place. They exist to sell stuff. And in my opinion, the more successful they are at selling stuff, the more impactful they can be on sustainability. But that has to be about how you go about doing your business and how you engage clients on particular issues, and how you lobby from the inside to bring about changes in what they do. But clients don't hire agencies to be sustainability partners. They hire them to help build their brand and create commercial success. And Steve Harrison's book that he wrote recently, called "Can't Sell, Won't Sell," I think is a very good wake-up call on that. You know, agencies are absolutely obsessed. A lot of agencies are obsessed with purpose. Now, I think people confuse the word purpose. All good companies have always had a purpose. Hewlett Packard had the purpose of creating technology for the benefit of mankind. That's what they stood for when they were founded. What they stood against was technology for technology's sake. Sony could have launched itself with a vision of creating a better rice cooker or a better transistor radio, because those are the first 2 products they sold. But instead, its founding fathers said, we want to make Japan synonymous with quality. We want the words "made in Japan" on our products to mean something positive, not it's a piece of cheap shit from the East. Apple is all about creativity. Nike's all about winning. Those are purposes. Those are clear purposes that drive the people who work for those companies to get out of bed in the morning and do their best work. And I'm not saying that people at Apple or Nike or Hewlett Packard or Sony don't care about the world they live in. They do. And I'm sure at all of those companies, there are a number of initiatives that support a drive to sustainability. But first and foremost, they exist to, to, in Apple's case, make the computers on people's desks look nicer, to make the computers on people's desks have a more logical and simple interface than the stuff that the PC manufacturers throw out. And do those things impact the world positively? Yes, they do. I like the way my laptop works on this, and I like the way it looks on my desk. I like the way it operates. I hate PCs, so this makes my life better. And I think that's a perfectly worthy purpose. But we get too carried away in thinking that every company at every minute of the day needs to have a purpose that's sort of tree hugging in nature. And I'm a certified card carrying tree hugger. I'm an environmentalist. I'm a conservationist. But I'm aware of the role for that and the place in the pecking order when I'm doing my job.
That's fantastic to listen.
That's probably going to get me into trouble, but
I am more like, how can I say? I'm very connected to that, to sustainable marketing, reading about it. How can I do it? But it's great to think about the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. Of course, we need to think about the profit, but also people and planet. But what you described, for example, in terms of the diversity that you can have on your team, because that can bring better ideas and better results, and of course, a better place for people as a more diversity, rather than the admissions of the agency that you were asking if you had Oxford or Cambridge.
I mean, diversity is a harder thing to achieve, and what I've seen in a lot of places, like they go, right, we're going to recruit in a much more diverse way, but then they bring in diverse people and try to force them to act just like everybody who's always worked in the agency. So I'm gonna bring you in from you've been to a government secondary school in East London. You didn't go to university, or you went to a local college, and you've got a fantastic view on the world. But now I want you to dress and behave like all the people I just hired out of Balliol College. It's ridiculous. You want diversity, you embrace diversity, and you get what diversity brings you, and that is generally better ideas.
Yeah, that's on diversity, equity, and inclusion, also on the ads, because there are a lot of stereotypes on the ads that we need to break.
Yes.
Human were objectified, and car driving always the man, and this is changing now, which is better, but still there are a lot of things that can do it in terms of that.
I suppose the core of the answer to your question is agencies need to spend a bit more time and effort looking for the truth. And for me, truth, when I was talking about combining an understanding of brand and culture and humanity, you're looking for a truth in each of those areas, something that is just irrefutable, and something that allows you to, so it's your brand truth, cultural truth, human truth. You've got to bring all of those things together, and you can use the cultural truth and the human truth in your campaigns as a way of engaging people, giving them something to relate to because they know it's true. And most of the most effective campaigns I've worked on have at their heart a truth that is so obvious and so simple that you look at it and you think, well, why did I never think of it that way before? And the Got Milk idea is a classic of those. That it's based on the notion that the only time you think about milk is when you haven't got any. And I must have presented that case history to thousands of people over the years, and they'll go, "Yeah, gosh, duh. What? But why didn't anybody think of that before?" Well, certainly nobody in advertising, because their clients said, we've got to talk about milk's health credentials. We've got to talk about vitamins and calcium and good for your bones and good for your teeth. But what what they say you've got to do isn't necessarily what you've got to do if you want to engage people. And the first job I have on almost any brief I'm ever given is to question the brief and say, is that really the problem that we need to solve? Because I'd say 9 times out of 10, the problem that the client gives me is a problem that they identify solely from the perspective of themselves as clients. You know, I'm the brand manager on toilet paper, and I spend every waking hour thinking about toilet paper. It's going to give you a pretty skewed view on the world, because people in the real world don't think about toilet. Actually, it's much like milk. The only time you think about toilet paper is when you need it and you haven't got any.
That's a big challenge.
Yes. Very, very big
What
challenge.
can you do then?
Anyway, let's not expand that conversation.
Let's not spend time on that. And thinking about today's planners and the life that we have, sometimes when I use ChatGPT or Perplexity, I keep thinking, well, haven't I been intelligent enough? So I need to use the artificial intelligence. But then it's the conversation that brings me new ideas. And then with the quotes that I write and it's a conversation that can bring new things. But some people have said that maybe this could kill some positions of work. Could this be something bad for the planners, or how could you train the planners to use on the best way possible the AI to help them in the planning of the campaign?
Well, the advances in AI have largely happened since I left the business. And the more I hear about it, the happier I am that I did leave the business in 2018, because there's a lot that's happened since that I don't think I would have enjoyed very much. I'm still, and call me a Luddite, but I'm still a great believer in human intelligence. And I don't think planners should throw in the towel and if they're getting replaced by AI, then it means they're not doing their job properly in the first place. And there will still be a role, should still be a role for human instinct and intuition and intelligence, particularly in the creative industry, because that will be the last frontier for AI, is being able not just to analyze vast amounts of data, not just to have sort of make basic connections between things, but to make those creative leaps that turn something ordinary into something magical. And I see no evidence of that so far. Will it come? Perhaps, possibly, probably. I don't know, and I'm no expert on it. But throughout my career as a planner, before AI was even thought of outside of science fiction books, there were a lot of planners who were very good at their job and applying their logical analytical skills to understanding problems, and their intuitive and lateral and creative skills to suggesting solutions to those problems. There were a lot of planners who were very good at that. There were a lot more who weren't. And they didn't need the development of AI to have their jobs threatened. They just weren't very good planners, and they weren't very useful in the creative process. So, you know, to me, anybody who's fearful of being usurped by technology just better get useful and be doing a good job. So there couldn't be any question of them not being involved in the agency and not being part of the team.
That's fantastic. And it's connected with the last question over here. Which advice would you give? A lot of advices I have gave already on this conversation, but which one would you give for people like me that are refurbishing on planning? So reading your book and the things about it, and checking those points on AI that you've mentioned. What else can I do to be redeveloped as a planner, as a strategist?
Well, whatever level you are as a strategist, and whether you're redeveloping and repurposing, or whether you're coming into the industry as a strategist at the entry level, fundamentally, I think it's your job to provide decision makers with all the information they need to make the best possible decisions about advertising. That's what planners do. You can't make the decisions for them, shouldn't make the decisions for them. So when Jeff Goodby and Rich Silverstein offered me the job at Goodby Silverstein in San Francisco, I asked them why they wanted a planning department. And Jeff said, I want to have somebody in the agency whose job it is to say no to me. And he wanted me to have a right of veto over certain work that got produced. Now, the interesting thing is, in the whole 10 years I spent at Goodby, I never once exercised a right of veto. And Jeff liked to talk to clients about that. He said, this guy here, am I right? He's the one whose job it is to say no. His job is to disagree with me. And sure, I disagreed with him on things, but I never said, no, you can't do it. I'd say, well, here are the reasons why I think it might be the wrong thing to do. But ultimately, you're the creative director, and you're the agency principal. You're the key decision maker here. And you could make the decision that you're going to go ahead with it anyway, in spite of the evidence to the contrary. But there's still a client down in Los Angeles or in New York or somewhere in the Midwest who might actually say no. I hear you, Jeff. Respect your recommendation, but no, I'm not going to do it because of the reasons that John's outlined or whatever. But I never made that decision. Ultimately, the client makes the decision, and within the agency, it's the creative director who should make the decision. So I was there simply as with the responsibility of providing them with all of the information they needed to weigh up to make the right decision. And if you're going to do that as a strategist, you need to draw information from as many different sources, as many different angles as you possibly can. You have to understand your client's business inside and out. You have to develop the right kind of relationships with the creative people you're working with, because how often do you hear somebody say in the business, oh, well, you have to work with the creatives this way, as if everybody who has the word creative on their business card in the agency is the same person and thinks the same way and responds the same way to different stimuli. And I'll give you an example of how ridiculous that is. And it's even Jeff Goodby and Rich Silverstein, who are always mentioned in the same breath. Goodby and Silverstein, Jeff and Rich and Jeff, they could not be more different from one another. They both share a common goal, but their way of getting there is ridiculously different. And I mean, Jeff is a man of words, very thoughtful. The way you interact with Jeff, or the way people used to interact with Jeff when I was there, was you get in a room with him very rarely, but if you do, you spend an hour or two in there. And you talk and you talk and you talk. And at some point, he might write a note about something and nod his head and think and say at the end, well, that was useful. And you're not quite sure how useful or why it was useful. But it was always lengthy conversation. Rich operated the way goldfish feed, you'd have to meet him 20 times in a day for no more than a minute at a time. And people in the agency used to characterize them as Jeff, so Rich being the nuclear explosion and Jeff being the radioactive fallout. And if you've got somebody who's a nuclear explosion and somebody who's radioactive fallout, you have to act very differently with them. I fed Jeff words, I fed Rich pictures, I fed Jeff paragraphs, I fed Rich short sentences. But you've got to learn how to interact with them and how to engage them as you start to develop your ideas. But most important of all, and this is an area where I think a lot of planners have completely lost the plot, you've got to spend time out in the real world. And not just in sterile research facilities, and not just, well, and definitely not just quantitative surveys, but real conversations in the places where people interact with categories and brands, buy them, use them. And you've also got to talk to people outside the small circle that's defined by the client as representing their target, because everybody around that target has opinions about the brand and the category, and might have opinions about people who use them, own them, drive them, drink them. And you need to have the broadest possible frame of reference, point of view. So that's what strategists need to be doing. And ultimately, in an agency, you're only as good as the last piece of work you did. And when young planners say to me, how do I know I'm doing my job right? My answer is usually that you know it's right when you knock on somebody's door or show up at their workstation and they're pleased to see you. And they're pleased to see you and want to spend time with you because they think you're going to make their job easier. They think you're going to help them create something that's better than it would have been if you hadn't shown up at their office or at their workspace. And it comes back to that thing I've always banged on about, which is that, like, whatever your role in the agency, it doesn't matter what you do. You've just got to be useful. You've got to be one of the people, and anyone who's got ambitions to be successful in the business needs to understand that in any agency, somewhere between 2 and 5% of the people who work for that agency actually make a difference to the agency. The other 95 to 98% have an important job to do to keep the ship moving, keep on putting coal in the furnace and keep it moving along and servicing the clients and dealing with all the day-to-day. But when the critical moments come, and that's a new business pitch, it's you've got to come up with a new campaign for an existing client, those moments that define an agency that contribute to revenues and to profit and to reputation, the people who run the agency will think, who do I want in the room with me? Who in this moment of crisis or in this moment of great opportunity, who do I want to bring in and be part of the team? And you need to be one of those people. You need to be one of the people who's inside the room, not one of the one walking past thinking, I wonder what they're talking about in there. And I don't care what your job is, whether you're a strategist, a creative person. And we used to, at Goodby, and when I worked at Berlin Cameron in New York, there were young account people who were part of every pitch because they were brilliant. They just got stuff done. They learned to predict questions before we asked them. They provided things before it had occurred to us that we needed to ask for them. And they were so important to the process. But they weren't the most senior people in the agency. They were useful.
I want to be back at an agency like that. As eventually, if I can be the 5%, that really helps them more than just make the things work. And I need to feel like restarting my role as a strategist. And it's been quite a class today to talk to you about that. You are a legend to me. I read your book. I have read your book when I was on college and university, and helped me a lot to go from being a copywriter to being a strategist. Thanks a lot for
well, thank you for your kind words, and it's been a pleasure meeting you. And I hope this has been useful.
Very, very useful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Rafa.
Abração.
See you. Bye-bye.